people need to recognize the indicators of trafficking happening with someone they know. Like an example of a couple. If it's a juvenile and they show up with a phone, where did the phone come from? Who's paying for the phone? Oh, it doesn't work. It's busted screen, whatnot. But it can get on the internet still. So that phone needs to be taken away, and we need to just, be our own detectives and figure out where this phone came from. Hotel keys. No 14-year-old should have hotel keys. Um, just like we're watching Yellowstone, the farmers, they brand their cows.
Hmm.
Traffickers like to brand their victims. There's literally, I have pictures of victims that I've taken the photo, and I'm like, that says property of, and then the trafficker's name.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in the Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Fire Forge Leader podcast. Today, we have an amazing woman who's out there on the front lines, and has been for many years, fighting this thing called human exploitation, human trafficking. I'd like to introduce Heidi Chance, but I think she'll do a lot better job of it herself. So, Heidi, if you could give us just a little bit about you, that'd be fantastic.
Thank you so much. Yes, I am a retired detective from a major city police department. I spent 25 years with that agency. I started when I was 12. Um, and I spent the latter half of my career, almost 14 years, in the human exploitation and trafficking unit, where I worked as an undercover detective, um, both doing operations as an undercover as well as investigations involving actual victims. The part of the undercover was targeting sex buyers and traffickers. And so I have a unique lived experience as a female undercover, being solicited by thousands of sex buyers over all those years, and then hundreds of traffickers trying to recruit and groom me. So I am now doing my since I retired in 21, October of 21, working through my own business, consulting law enforcement, trying to do training, and then I have a second mission to do community awareness about sex trafficking. I've developed a whole course on my website and everything that people can take to get kind of the full explanation of trafficking and where we are today here in the United States, specifically with domestic trafficking.
Fantastic. So where do you live at right now, Heidi?
So I'm coming to you from Arizona, and it's still 100 plus.
Yeah, I'd rather be in Kansas City right now. 100 plus
Yeah,
is way too much for this time of year.
yeah.
Uh, so have you always lived in Phoenix, or did you hail from somewhere else?
Yeah, no, I'm a Phoenician, which is what they call a person who's born and raised here in Arizona. Um, I actually have never wanted to leave yet. I mean, maybe someday in the future. I'm looking Colorado, Montana. We're watching Yellowstone. But I don't know.
That'd be a definite temperature difference for you. Colorado
Yeah,
gets a
I
little
don't
chilly.
know how I would feel in the cold all the time. Both of those.
So growing up in Phoenix, what was your family situation like? How did you grow up?
So I grew up with my dad being an officer at the same agency I went to. So I am an officer's daughter. And then he actually, I have my co-host right here. He actually, his dad, so my grandfather was NYPD. So I'm actually third generation police officer, and I have an uncle also that was an officer here in Arizona. So it's definitely in the family, and grew up with that in the family for sure.
Nice, nice. So suburbia or right in the heart of the city?
Have you been to Arizona?
I have not. I have
Okay.
not.
Arizona is very spread out. I mean, people are underwhelmed, I think, by our downtown because it's really not the high rises that you see in some cities, but it is the fifth largest city in the United States,
Well,
and we're not landlocked. Yeah.
that I knew that it was a large city. So I was,
hmm
it's really spread out. So it's just one city, or is it made up of multiple little subdivisions and things like that?
Yeah. So Phoenix is not landlocked, one city, but then there are, you've heard of Scottsdale, I'm sure,
Oh, yeah.
and Glendale, Arizona, which is where our Cardinals live playing. And so there are little suburb cities surrounding Phoenix and bordering Phoenix, but Phoenix is the capital.
So I guess my questioning around how you grew up is really, you grew up in this police family. Most police officers don't get straight into, um, busting people in prostitution, sex trafficking,
Oh,
things like that. So, how did you make your transition from regular police department to getting into this line of work?
yeah. So most cops' kids are actually in trouble. They're like preachers' kids. They all get in trouble. But I was not in trouble. I was afraid of my dad, which is what we're missing in the United States today. But basically, uh, as a patrol officer, I spent 10 years in patrol in various positions of patrol, school resource officer, community action officer. Um, and I basically was in a position of school resource officer when I first got a taste of, this world of trafficking. I had a student that I recognized at the station one day who basically was a former student of mine. She was still a juvenile on that day, but she was in seventh and eighth grade when I knew her. And she recognized me. I recognized her. I was like, "Why are you in trouble?" And she proceeded to tell me about being in trouble for prostitution. And I was like, why is a young kid in trouble for prostitution? Even though I had already been an officer for many years. And so that's where I was really, I mean, she wasn't really forthcoming with a bunch of details. Um, Later, my education into sex trafficking, I now recognize why, because she was bonded to her trafficker, thought she was in a relationship with him, and at that moment didn't see herself as a victim. And so she wasn't forthcoming even with the officers as far as details of her trafficking. And I don't think that any case was ever generated on that incident revolving around her and that current trafficker. But later on, I did, check back in with where she at in her life, and I think that she definitely fell into drugs, and all of that was a result of what happened to her as a youth, with that trafficker exploiting her. But that's when I definitely got involved with the unit. Back then, it was called Vice, which a lot of other agencies also have Vice units, but typically their Vice units are like the drug guys. So they're
Right.
buying drugs. I've bought drugs before, but typically I sell sex. So I, I definitely was not in a unit where that was my main assignment. We had a large enough agency to have an actual undercover drug unit. And so the Vice unit was solely at the time, and we're talking 2007, 2008, it was solely prostitution. And the way that I describe this when I speak about my history here is I have a unique perspective also with seeing the evolution of the problem and the evolution of a large agency, evolving to match this problem. And so back then we were just targeting prostitutes. I mean, we were every day, the male officers would pose as sex buyers. These girls were, on the corner, out in public, on the streets. and the males would pull up on them, and they would have this conversation of a sex act in exchange for money, and they would get arrested, and we would book them in jail and move on to the next one. Sometimes we'd see the same person the next day, that kind of action. And so it wasn't until about 2008-ish, somewhere in there, there was an incident involving a juvenile who was a runaway initially, but then later we found that she was being held against her will in a dog crate, locked in an apartment. There was a male and female that had met her in a park and basically kept her in this dog crate, and then men would come to have sex with her at the apartment, and she'd have to stay in the dog crate. Or there was also like a platform bed, like a wooden platform bed with a mattress on top of it, but there was enough room for a person to be under there. And so officers had actually responded to this apartment multiple times looking for her, but she was so scared of these people that she stayed quiet. And mom kept sending the officers back over there, and eventually they were able to find her secured underneath this mattress in this platform bed. And so that kind of like opened everyone's eyes, I think, at least in my city, that, there's traffickers that are exploiting these people, specifically juveniles also. And so the direction really changed to start targeting sex buyers and traffickers. And that's where we are still today. There's a lot of agencies out there that, it's my understanding, don't do a lot of proactive operations like I'm about to describe. And that's where I feel part of my mission since I retired is to train agencies and get them, excited about and confident in exploring doing these proactive operations, because we really need to all be doing it, because the traffickers speak to each other now and they tell each other it's safe over here, or go over there, that agency doesn't have undercovers, all of those things. They communicate for sure. And so definitely that's where I started. But on the lines of the training, I didn't have a class in the academy about sex trafficking. And I think that's also part of why I didn't recognize and was so shocked and surprised when that little girl was describing her prostituting for her boyfriend. I didn't even think that that was a thing going on. That's changed now, at least for most agencies. There are still some out there that don't even train their patrol officers to recognize sex trafficking happening on a call that they respond to or a vehicle that they pull over. And so that's definitely where I would love to come in and help agencies with that as well. So patrol recognition and response to, sex trafficking going on in their patrol calls.
So at the beginning of that, you talked about this girl, and you were a school resource officer.
Uh-huh.
So one thing I want to clarify: when you knew her, was she in 7th, 8th grade, or when she was prostituting herself or being prostituted?
So I knew her when she was in 7th or 8th grade. I can't remember what year she was because I was there for a couple of years. But on the day that I met her at the police station again, she was still a juvenile. So she was like 16, almost 17. So when I met her, it was like 13, 14. And to your age question, that's another situation. When I first started, 15 was the age that we were seeing that kids were being involved with sex trafficking. I'm hearing now, nationally, if you Google it, it's lower than 13, possibly even 11. So these kids are getting involved in or being exploited, lured away from home, all of those things even earlier. And that should be super concerning to parents about having conversations with their kids and putting measures in place, using tools to make sure this doesn't happen.
Agreed. That is just unbelievable to me. And I find it interesting that you talk about that there was no training on how to ID. And we'll get into that a little bit on how people can ID. But, really, this is such a deep, dark secret that nobody wants to really talk about. But the more that I dig into this, the more prevalent I see that it is. So I guess it leads me to a question when I think about this, no matter what the ages are, it's wrong, right? But there's people out there that are creating the demand for it. What does that person look like? Who are these people out there in society that you're encountering?
So they used to be called Johns, but now we refer to them as sex buyers, and they are individuals who purchase other people for sex. Um, in my 14 years, and I haven't met an officer yet talk about a female being a buyer. So I'm saying what I'm saying. Men are contributing to this issue, and they are predominantly 99.9% the buyers that we see out there. So really, the answer to this entire situation and solving this problem is if men stopped buying sex, there wouldn't be any sex trafficking.
Yeah,
I also said that. So that is definitely the situation as far as I see it, because there's no reason for all of this to be going on if we didn't have the demand for it.
agreed. So it's men, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'll get into that, some of the reasons for that in today's society. But what kind of men? I mean, are these low lifes? Are they business people? Are they people with too much money and not enough brains? What type of person?
All of the above.
Mm.
I have walked up to a car posing as a prostitute, walking the streets, and I've seen uniform pants still on, Department of Corrections guy that we later found out was a Department of Corrections guy. Professional job, a person of, working for the government, working for the state, construction workers, businessmen, doctors. Um, it isn't a certain demographic. It is a sexual deviance, I think, that goes on with men. There's a new documentary out. If you haven't heard of it, it's called Wake Up. It is a really good depiction of, showing a buyer, and this buyer actually, after he gets found out by his wife, attempts suicide. It's a really good depiction of, he looks like a godly man that goes to church, but he has this addiction to pornography. Initially, you see him on the computer constantly locking the bedroom door. Little girls trying to knock on the door. Daddy, where are you? Dinner's ready. And then it moves on to where he actually goes in person to meet a prostitute. And I'll let you see the movie, but it's definitely a really good. It's the best example I've seen so far about buyers, besides the movie that I'm in, as far as the documentary that filmed our unit. It's called Sex Trafficking in America. Frontline PBS followed us for 3 years, and it took 3 years because they actually followed an actual case all the way through, the one that you see in the film. But it shows our undercover operations. It shows the conversations we're having with sex buyers. It shows sex buyers showing up to our hotel. Some of them are remorseful, crying even, but they're not getting it that they're contributing to this whole situation. And so stopping the demand is really, really important. But definitely, there's documentaries out there now. In fact, Sound of Freedom, have you seen that?
I have.
Yeah, Sound of Freedom, that has put human trafficking in the forefront of everyone's mind. And that is a wonderful thing, no matter how much drama is going on with whatever. I don't even know. All I know is that people are thinking about human trafficking. I just want to make sure that they recognize that that's not just something that happens in foreign countries. That's happening right here in the United States, and it looks a little different. There's not a lot of abductions like you see in that film. It is more so on devices, on the computer, on games, where basically the white van that we know about with kidnappings and abductions, the white van is your kid's Roblox game or the cell phone in their hand or their TikTok channel. That's the white van these days because that's where predators are literally lurking. Predators, sex buyers, traffickers, they're all right there. And towards the end of my career, we were doing operations targeting traffickers. We called it catfishing pimps. And so I have 6 Facebooks, 3 Instagram, Tag, Meet Me, Bumble, Plenty of Fish, Snapchat, Twitter. X, whatever it's called now, all in undercover personas so that I can engage with traffickers instead of a live victim. And, we're getting felony charges on them. We're able to extradite them from other states and have them be held accountable and, recognize that they are on these devices, they're on social media, they're on these profiles actively all day long. This is their job, managing the victims they have and trying to find new ones. And that's evident by what we've been doing for the last several years.
I think that's an interesting point that you made. I also agree. Sound of Freedom, put it in the forefront. There is a lot of drama around it, but it did bring a lot of focus. But that's really international sex trafficking, child trafficking. But it does look a lot different in the United States and within the same country. And I like that visual that you put in my mind there with the white van being the technology. That's the free candy, right? It's a lure that people are using, rather than, selling ice cream and snatching a kid. They're doing it more covertly through these devices.
Yeah, perception is everything. These traffickers build their profile page with flashy cars and expensive trips and limos and jewelry, and it makes it seem like they're this badass pimp and to a kid, and then they follow that up with the words that they're, spewing in the direction of that victim they're targeting. What are you supposed to think other than that must be reality? He's got all these pictures of him by fancy cars,
Yeah.
So it's
And it lines right
unfortunate.
up, right up to all the rap stars and everything else, right? I mean,
Well,
what these
that,
kids
and
think are cool.
if you don't have a conversation with your child in advance of them having social media, that not everything you see on social media is true, not everything you Google is true. um, you know, Arming them with the ability to make decisions for themselves instead of falling into these traps that these traffickers are setting with the perception that they're putting in place on their profiles. That's where that I urge that to happen, especially, like I said, 11 years old. It is not too young. Before that, I would say 11 years old is too late,
Yep.
because by then they already probably have a phone. And having them grow up with, having conversations on my sheets, I talk about, have conversations with your kids about if someone's telling you to delete messages. That's going to happen. And I want you to tell me, your mom, when that happens, because that is someone trying to keep secrets from me and they're not part of our family. Or if they say create a whole separate profile that your mom doesn't know about, or if they tell them to use some kind of emoji that's a code word for your mom just came in the room. All of those conversations need to happen before you allow them free, reign on these devices. But it's so hard because I recently flew to another state to go present at a conference, and I was in the airport getting lunch at the little fast food place, and I saw these two kids. Each of them had an iPad, and they were both flipping through TikTok. And the parents were not even paying attention to what they were doing on their, and then they didn't speak English. They were from another country, but I was like, oh my gosh. And they look like 6, 7, and they're on TikTok, and they're, watching who knows what on TikTok and engaging with who knows who, stranger danger
Yeah, for sure.
on these devices. So,
And people think that physical distance keeps them safe, but it doesn't, right? I mean, it's a connection point.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, it's a way for traffickers to develop what they are trying to develop, like a relationship with and bond with these victims, enough to the point where I've had victims get on a Greyhound bus by themselves, running away from home to come up to their trafficker. So
that kind of brings us into the other end. We talked about the Johns, the sex buyers, but what about the victims? What are they like? What are some common points that route them this direction?
So that's another myth I think that's out there, that people think that victims are in the child welfare system or in poor areas or only Hispanic kids or, all of these, it's not going to happen to my kid type of thing. And what I want people to understand is there is no demographic, there is no age, there is no economic, social, established system for them. It is any age, any demographic, any economic status. So I have an investigation that I talk about not only for this reason, but also because took 5 years of my life to do this case, and it's badass because the guy got 500 years almost in prison.
Wow.
But this case has like different elements of victims. So when I'm talking about victims in this case, we've got familial trafficking. So it was an uncle offending on his 13-year-old niece who was with him in this situation until she was almost 17. So years of abuse, sexual abuse. And then his wife, one of his, I think she was the third wife. Anyway, she's a former Department of Corrections officer who in her 40s
Hmm.
lost her job because she got heavy into drugs, met him when she was stripping at the strip club, and he introduced her into his brothel where he had men coming to the house to have sex with these victims. And she brought her 17-year-old daughter into that. Then you
Jeez.
have one of the other victims who was barely an adult. She was 19. Full ride scholarship to a university. Parents are nurses, like no problem financially. Meets some guy, a photographer on Craigslist, who convinces her to come down to take photos, have sex with her, introduces her to the guy owning the brothel, and then he traffics her out of the brothel. So she's now a resident of the female prison here in Arizona, and her entire life is down the tubes because of that whole situation. And, you know, it's definitely that whole one case shows these dynamics of different victims related to the trafficker, strangers, adults, well off kids, all of it in the one case. So and it also resulted in him getting sentenced to 493.5 years, which I think is a record in the United States. I'm just saying, pat myself on the back. It wasn't just me by myself, but that's a huge case, and it's one that I like to teach on because I like to show all of those different dynamics, plus encourage detectives to do the investigation. I mean, that took 5 years to go to trial. Trial was 7 months long. That's a long time to keep your
Yeah.
victims wanting to still press charges. Some of them went back to drugs, some of them went back to prostitution. Constant issues with these victims. And it's also a point to that is we didn't do it by ourselves. We had victim advocates, survivor victim advocates, people from other organizations support our main goal, which was to get these victims justice. And so having all of that together, really all of us got that result, and it's an incredible result.
So, reading between the lines with that case, there's going to be people who are forced into it, right?
Yes.
By their families, or like the case that you talked about before with the uh, young lady kept in the dog kennel, which that just makes me sick in the pit of my gut. But then there's also people who are coerced into believing that they're making that choice, right? And a lot of that's through shame or whatever else. But is it a certain thing that they believe that they're missing in their life, or is there a common bond in those cases that you can connect?
Yeah, so I would say that victims that are involved with what is perceived maybe by the public as it's their choice to be doing this, those people either entered the situation as juveniles or they are so, and a lot of people use the word brainwashed, but I mean, it happens with domestic violence relationships too. They're so involved with that trafficker, and there is also a thing they call trauma bond that they are loyal to this person no matter how many times they beat them up. But that's over the course of all of the force, fraud, and coercion going on that got them to that day where they, stay with this person voluntarily. I would say that traffickers seek out vulnerable individuals, whether they're youth, have some kind of issue with their family, like child welfare, or even adults where they have a low self esteem, they have no family support, they lost their job, all kinds of circumstances. They're a vulnerable person, both adult or juvenile. And traffickers are very skilled at finding people vulnerable. That's what they do all day long. They have no other job, is looking for these vulnerable people to exploit, and managing the victims that they're already exploiting. So it's definitely a situation of, these victims are ripe for the picking, and unfortunately, they fall into this situation with these people.
And there's an abundance of harvest right now when you start talking about all that. There's
Oh, yeah.
people that are, battling anxiety and depression and, just the cyberbullying. And I mean, you name it, there's someone who's lacking something in their life today, right?
Yeah. And so couple that with all of the, the things that traffickers normally did to find victims, for sure. And then the internet, like if you have a kid on the phone putting on their Facebook profile, well, Facebook's for old people, let's use Snapchat, putting out there that they hate their parents or they want to run away, and traffickers, I don't know if they're Google searching that shit or not, but they're finding these kids who are putting it out there on their public profiles that they shouldn't have in the first place, because if their parents put the rules in place and checked, they shouldn't have public profiles. That's where these traffickers are finding them. And I think that's definitely one other thing is we grew up with the brick phone. We didn't have the internet at our fingertips, and we are now seeing the results of generations that are growing up with the internet at their fingertips, and it's way, way worse than we could ever imagine. All
Agreed.
the things that are happening because of that.
Couple of clarifications. It's not for old people because I'm still on Facebook.
Okay. Me too. I have
I
6 of them.
used to be old.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm sure you remember, but we had the 30-foot cords that you got to go
Yeah.
over into the closet to talk to your girlfriend or boyfriend, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah,
It's not that way.
a lot different environment for sure. In your experience, did you there's chat rooms and different things for everything out there. I'm gonna imagine that there's kids whose parents think that it's probably good that they go and meet with their online friends in these social chat rooms for depression or whatever, because they're able to talk about them there. Do predators hang out in those kind of places?
Yeah, I would say anywhere where there's private messaging, traffickers could be. Um, it's definitely it's a situation where, um, there's so many apps out there. There are different apps that look like an app, like a calculator, and it's actually something else. There are apps
Mm.
out there working against parents being able to figure it out and those kind of things. So it's definitely a situation where parents need to step up to the plate, learn a little bit more about technology, know where to find it. So I always direct them to Bark Technologies or even GABB Wireless. Those two companies have a blog on their website, and they talk about these new apps. Like Bark Technologies just put out something about the Saturn app. If you've heard about the Saturn app, it's an app encouraged by the school for kids to download so they can talk to their teacher and other classmates. But Bark Technologies investigates these apps and sees how easy it is for predators to get a profile on that app and engage with students. And they have an entire school of students that they can engage with
Oh,
if they can get in. So, that keeping up on all of that is a job for parents for sure, so that they're not blindsided by something happening. And then if something does happen, there's some things that I encourage parents not to do. So I've taken over profiles of several victims where their parents found stuff, and then I engaged with the person posing as that kid and got them to meet and got them in custody. But some of these apps require location services on. They require, like, you know how Snapchat, if you take a picture, it'll tell the other person you took a picture, those kind of things. So I advise parents, if you're gonna pursue going after somebody and wanting the police to do something, don't engage with them. Don't log out. Call right away. Tell the 911 operator, hey, I've got this phone logged in. If it logs out, we're going to lose this conversation. This person can delete the stuff from the other side of the conversation. That's another thing. And I need an officer here right away. I want to give consent for them to take over this profile and engage with this person and get them in custody. And the officers hopefully have gone through some training. That's another issue of coming into that situation, capturing that evidence without indicating to the bad guy that they're capturing it, and involving a detective that knows how to do that chatting with predators, where we can engage in the conversation without being entrapping them, and get them in custody. And so that way they're not doing the same thing, because you guaranteed they're doing the same thing to several other kids or nurturing other profiles in case this one falls off, guaranteed. And so, that would lead to warrants on the phone, possibly harmful images, all kinds of other stuff, other felony charges, but definitely needs to be pursued. And we need parents to recognize, law enforcement's here for a reason. We're here to help you. We're going to capture that evidence. We're going to get the bad guy. We're going to get you justice. We just need your help with certain things.
So a couple of questions
Yeah.
come to mind in that. So first off, you have these people that are on the front lines, lining these kids up and that sort of thing. How deep does that go in the background? Is it just that one person who's trafficking? Is it a network? Is there a kingpin? I mean, what does that look like?
Well, I can only speak from my perspective and experience. And what I've experienced are pimps that there is a hierarchy. There's typically someone else helping them manage all of these people. Typically, that might be a female, and that female might be loyal to that trafficker in the sense that they have children in common, been with the trafficker the longest, will hide the trafficker from law enforcement. They'll rent vehicles in their name or get hotel rooms in their name or do things to train and recruit and groom these victims for the trafficker. But definitely, there's also been a shift of what we used to call territorial pimps. Like they would literally shoot each other over, the territory. And now they're kind of partnering up. And so they're doing counter surveillance for each other. They're intermixing victims. They're traveling together. They're partnering up. They're doing rap videos together, all those things. And it's one of those things that we need to recognize. They're communicating better. It's truly a law enforcement versus them type of thing. And, without that training for patrol to recognize trafficking, I mean, these pimps are bragging. I have a Facebook Live video. I'm going off on a tangent, but I have a Facebook Live video of a pimp literally doing the Facebook Live, look at me, screaming at his victim who's going into a gas station, has a whole bunch of money, shows the gas station where there's 5 patrol cars, there's officers doing whatever they're doing, but he's like, they don't see me. Nah, they don't see me. And it's true. I mean, not that was a crime what he was doing, but the point is there that these traffickers know that patrol isn't seeing them because they're either not getting training in academy or they are, only looking for the gangsters and the drug dealers, and they're not realizing that that also could be the traffickers. And it's not an easy case to investigate. These are really hard cases to investigate. I'm not going to have a witness that saw someone have sex, get money, and then turn that money over to their trafficker. So I have to put these cases together with corroborative evidence. Sometimes these cases come to us 5 months later, and I got to backtrack and try and find some evidence. DNA is gone at that point, those kind of things. And so it's not easy for an officer to want to investigate these. Victims are hard. They dip out, they change their mind, they go back to prostitution, they go back to drugs, they don't answer the phone calls, they don't show up to court. it's kind of hard. But the wins that we can get, I celebrate those, and I try and share to inspire and try and encourage, officers to do those investigations.
So I agree with you 100%. A lot of times, of course, like what we talked about, if it's someone who's an adult or close to that, it oftentimes looks like it's a voluntary event, right? So you got to see all the other transactions behind the scenes. With a child, it's a lot different. But then you get into the education arena with the police officers as well. I saw a video online the other day where these two police officers, it was on a Ring camera, right? And they come up to the door and they knock, and this gentleman comes to the door and talks about, thanks for coming over and, what have you. And they talk about this stuff that was happening online with his daughter that he called about. And the police officers are like, well, she could, I can't remember. They talked about some, go to jail for some offense about putting pornography out there at 11 years old. And the gentleman, of course, got very angry because he knew that she was being coerced. But to me, that was just a total lack of education. So with that being said, you've also mentioned it yourself that there's this need to educate more in the police departments. I know that they're mostly out there trying to do their best, right? So I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression, but what kind of percentage do you think are truly educated in this arena? If you were going to just guess, I know you don't know the answer, but
Well, I can't put a number to the training, the lack of training. I think that it is evident in videos like that where we live in a day and age that everything's recorded now. So we're going to see that more and more. And, that seems like a larger agency. So I'm not sure where the disconnect was specifically with those officers. But for sure, there's a liability in, that agency not providing training and not making sure that they are comprehending that training. And, that's definitely something that needs to change with agencies for sure. Back to your point about some of the victims that we come forward or that we come in contact with that are possibly doing this on their own or not, assisted by a trafficker or forced, coerced, or defrauded. My take on that is definitely law enforcement has recognized that these individuals are victims, that there are force, fraud, or coercion occurring with their victimization. Automatically, juveniles are automatically a victim, but I'm talking about adults. However, there is an issue with law enforcement. We still have to take action in a capacity where we have neighborhoods who are in those areas where there's street prostitution. People live there. There are schools. There are kids going to school. There are people in public. There are businesses. And it's to the point that we do have to take law enforcement action sometimes. At the same time, we are trying to recognize them as a victim. So it's both. We have people complaining that people are having sex in a vehicle in front of their daughter's window or throwing condoms in their front yard. We've got to start making arrests. We have victims who come forward and say, I never talked to you guys because my pimp told me that you would just arrest me, and here you are arresting me. So we have to find that balance between the two, and it takes, experienced officers in capacities such as detectives that have experienced both sides of it. I mean, I've had a case where I had a victim who was a juvenile. She testified against her trafficker on her 18th birthday. She was transitioning out of child welfare. She was going to get an apartment. She had a full ride scholarship to a university because someone created a grant program. We were paying for her phone at that point because she was still dealing with the trial. And then at the same time, because I have more than one case going on, I was investigating another trafficker that I arrested back in 2012 who was trafficking again. And we went to do search warrants on his apartment. And this victim answered the door and was We had her safe. We legally helped her change her name. She had everything going for her, and she went back to it. So at that point, we have to have a line to draw where we will take enforcement action and we will make an arrest, because what the hell am I supposed to do? We had you safe and you made the choice to go back. And that's another thing that I don't think a lot of people recognize. They want to legalize it, or they're like on the fence, or on the, extremes of the line, and law enforcement's here in the middle just trying to keep it balanced. A teeter-totter. That's what it is. Teeter-totter, if you remember, and law enforcement's right here. And we're just trying to take action when we need to and save people when we need to, and figure it out on the end, 1, 2, 3, 5 years later when it goes to trial.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
get you.
struggle. The struggle is real.
And I probably have a little bit more understanding than, well, I shouldn't say it like that. I have understanding in it because I'm an old drug addict, and I understand how much that shame and, the hurts of our past and, all those kind of things can affect you. And what I can't imagine, of course, is being in that situation where, you've obviously made some decisions because of someone else's trickery, right? But you feel like they're your own decisions. And you get to this point to where you're doing things that are outside of your moral code. I can't imagine what that shame feels like at that point, and how much that can hold you back and keep you doing those things, right?
Yeah, that's why it's important to have that team where we have non-governmental organizations that have put in place victim survivor advocates, resources, shelter locations, safe places for placement of both juveniles and adults, programs, goals, helping them get their ID, helping them get a job, helping them with child protective services if they have that issue going on. All of those, going to school, all of those things, luckily, at least in my location, are in place. And if they aren't in place, where there's someone listening today that, wants to do this and get involved, what can we do? That's where I would start with, linking up with local law enforcement, creating an organization to help be that support and that recovery and that aftermath care after someone's rescued and out of the system, because I got to go arrest the bad guy and kick down doors. And we need to have a safe place to have this victim start their healing process.
Right. So turning it to the really good part of this, right? You talked about how when you started in Vice in 2007, you were going after the prostitutes. The department evolved into starting to go after the Johns, going after the sex buyers. But really, to get to the root cause, we need to go deeper than that, right? What you do a lot is, of course, trying to train, but you go deeper than that as well. So can you talk about some of the resources that you have for parents, friends, all those kinds of things that we talked about before the show?
Yeah, so I didn't go into this, but I also teach for the National Criminal Justice Training Center Amber Alert program, and I travel all over the United States. And sometimes I get questions, and the one question that sticks out in my mind happened recently, like literally in 2023, and it was a person who asked, "What does the sex trafficking victim look like?" And so to me, I was taken aback, because I was like, wait a minute, this is after I already taught you all of this, everything, which means it's still not sinking in that, these victims could be anybody. It's not just the one demographic that we talked about before,
Right.
or the examples I've given here. And then in addition to that, there's more instruction that has to happen. Like, people need to recognize the indicators of sex trafficking happening with someone they know. Like, an example of a couple. If it's a juvenile and they show up with a phone, where did the phone come from? Who's paying for the phone? Oh, it doesn't work. It's busted screen, whatnot, but it can get on the internet still. So that phone needs to be taken away, and we need to just, be our own detectives and figure out where this phone came from. Hotel keys. No 14-year-old should have hotel keys. Just like we're watching Yellowstone, the farmers, they brand their cows. Traffickers like to brand their victims. There's literally, I have pictures of victims that I've taken a photo, and I'm like, that says property of, and then the trafficker's name. That's owning another person. It is modern day slavery. It's not just a catchphrase. It is what's really happening. And so if you see multiple individuals with the same or similar tattoo all together, traveling all together in a hotel, all together in a vehicle, that would be a huge bingo jackpot. What are the Yahtzee? That would be a, hey, this is definitely what I think it might be. Time to ask more questions and separate people. But I have on my website this list, an exhaustive list. You can text message 33777 the word awareness, and it'll prompt you to put your email in, and then it'll send you that sex trafficking indicators list. And then on my website, A Chance for Awareness, pun intended. My last name's Chance, at least right now. The tips for parents and for teens, I've created some lists, conversations, things to think about as a parent, to really recognize this whole situation and what's going on potentially with the youth. And then I think I talked about my course. I have a whole online course where I talk about the evolution of myself and my law enforcement agency I worked for, and then victims, vulnerabilities, sex buyers, and traffickers. And then I go into, most importantly, what people can do to get involved in this fight, to help law enforcement, even without donating money or, that kind of thing. There are things that you can do just as a private citizen to help in this fight.
So those things are fantastic. I hope everybody texts awareness to 33777, gets those resources. Talking to your kids is free. Just put it that way. Talking to your kids is free, right? The only reason why we don't do it is we feel awkward about it. But how awkward are we going to feel when we don't have that conversation and something happens? So text for those resources. Go on to Heidi's website. You can see it up on the screen here right now. But also, I would strongly urge you, and maybe you can give us a couple bullet points on this. I would strongly urge you to go to your local police department and see what kind of resources that they have around this.
Yeah, or even just Google, because there are so many amazing organizations that are, they're making it a mission to do certain parts of this whole thing, where you have some organizations that collect donations and they donate it to the shelter or they donate to the police. And that's wonderful, because I come across these victims who probably have been up for 24 hours, aren't wearing any underwear. They're wearing heels, a wig, and a mini dress, and that's it. Things that they are clinging to when I'm trying to interview them and talk to them about what happened to them are the heels and the purse and their makeup and their toothbrush back at the hotel room. And that's their only property that they've been allowed to own. And I'm not certain that I can get that back for them. But if I can offer them new property that's just theirs, that's been donated to me from, a business or an organization, that's huge in taking the first step in them recognizing they're going to be okay. They have their, basics. It's like basic stuff like toothbrush, toothpaste, hairbrush, a hair tie, some flip-flops, yoga pants, some underwear, a hoodie, those kind of things. Super basic little backpacks put together. Like, these are the smalls, these are the mediums, these are the large. You know what I mean? And have that to be able to donate to either these shelters or see these shelters go there. A lot of times they'll let you take a tour or at least speak to the director and ask, well, what are your needs? What do you guys need? Do you need gift cards to McDonald's? What do you need? But then there's also other ways you could volunteer your time if you're, wanting to take it to the next level. Other things that you can do to get involved in this fight.
I I have never thought about that before, how they would cling to things, but
Oh, yeah.
every book that I've ever read on prisoners of war or anything else, people who have been in some sort of slavery or confined condition, they always do that. So that's an interesting point that you just made there. One point though that I really want to make though is, and this hit me hard in this interview, is the focus. You were out there on the front lines for years battling this, and 99.5% of these people are men, right? So this message goes out to every father listening right now. We have to do better. We have to do better. We can stop and tell ourselves lies all day that, these people are out there because of their own will. They're in pornography. They're out on the streets selling themselves, what have you. But that's not always the case. And it's hard to see. And it's really hard for us to make that judgment as a bystander. We're not in this environment with them. We don't know what's happened. We don't see all the transactions around us. So fathers, husbands, every single man out there, we need to do better. We need to be better. And that's just kind of the message that I want to leave. Is there any final words that you'd like to say, Heidi, before we wrap this up?
Yeah, so just a very simple, if you see something, say something. Just like at the airport, you hear over the announcement, there's a bag unattended, you need to notify somebody. We need to also get to this point where we don't break out our phone just for TikTok to see some, victim getting assaulted by their trafficker at the bus stop to broadcast it on TikTok, but instead take out your phone, call the police, be a good witness. You see something, say something, because that's definitely something that's been described to me by victims where they told me no one did anything to help them, and that's just really, really bad.
And there's some sort of psychology reason behind that, people always think that someone else is going to do it. A lot of studies in on that, but nobody else does it. So we need to be
the one.
Be
the one.
Yeah, be the one. Well, Heidi, this has been an awesome interview. Really appreciate you being on.
Yeah.
Great insight. And, for all the listeners, really reach out. Once again, text awareness to 33777 and then visit Heidi's website at achanceforawareness.com. Once again, thank you, Heidi, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.